name is Mario Palermo. I'm with Canon Business Services in Victoria. Thank you for joining today and giving up your time. What we're going to take you through today is really that intersection of AI and the use of AI, the benefits, the management and governance of AI as part of the process, as part of process improvement internally. And where security intersects with that as well. So, and I'll introduce the speakers for today. So, Anthony Porter is the CBS security architect, and Jeff Beckitt is from Microsoft as a security solutions engineer, and they'll take you through all the important stuff. But the guys will introduce themselves a little bit further into the deck. Next slide, please, Anthony.
Is that me? Yeah, so I guess
hand off to you now.
Easy, no worries. Yeah, look, as mentioned, my name's Anthony Porter. I'm a cloud security architect at Canon Business Services. I've been in the industry for 15 odd years, where the last, I'd say 3 or 4 has been specifically focused on security. Look, kicking it off. Look, the era of AI isn't coming. It is already here. It's transforming how we work, how we collaborate, and how we deliver value across every industry and function. Looking at these statistics alone, 75% of knowledge workers are already using AI at work. And this figure alone has doubled in the last 6 months. This isn't, some sort of hype train. This genuinely is real adoption, and it's happening fast. For users using Microsoft Copilot, the impact is tangible. 30 minutes saved every day equals about 10 hours a month. That time is being redirected towards specifically strategic high-value work. Organizing, and not only that, organizations are taking notice. According to McKinsey, 35% of businesses expect to drive meaningful value from generative AI this year. And the IDC goes even further to show that there is a return of $3.50 for every dollar invested into AI. This isn't just an upgrade, it's a strategic shift for businesses. AI is driving productivity, unlocking innovation, and delivering measurable financial gains. As we can see, the adoption of generative AI is accelerating, and with it, the potential for transformation across every part of the business. But with the transformation comes a new reality. It's the risk. The risk is rising at an exponential rate. Security teams already manage a wide range of threat vectors, such as applications, identities, endpoints, networks, data, and the cloud. But now generative AI introduces a completely new attack surface that weren't already part of the equations before. New attack surfaces such as prompt injections and responses, or AI orchestration layering, or RAG data, or RAG, if you know what I'm talking about, and plugins and model integrations. These components are now part of the threat landscape, and they're vulnerable for new types of attacks. So, we're seeing an amplified risk for things like data leakage, where AI might inadvertently be exposing your confidential information, or indirect prompt injections, where malicious inputs manipulate AI's behavior, or all the way through to hallucination or model vulnerabilities, which can lead to misinformation or unintended outputs. And these are just not accidental. Bad actors are actively trying to target generative AI systems to extract sensitive data from training sets or exploit over permissioned models. With the rise of AI's usage comes the risk in its use. Organizations must now expand their security posture to include these new surfaces and threats. The catch to that is, the how. It's, we can say all of these things, we can say these are things that need to be done, but it's the how aspect which businesses are not 100% across. As I said, the AI adoption accelerates organizations and are facing a growing set of security challenges associated to this. Just highlighting some of these, be it data security and privacy. At the first and foremost, there is a lack of control to protect sensitive data from AI workloads. Over 80% of leaders cite data leakage as their top concern when adopting AI, whether it's through the prompts or the responses or that model access. The risk of overexposure of these confidential information is real and growing. Shadow AI, for example, is that BYO AI, or bring your own AI models. According to our work trend index at Microsoft, 78% of all AI users like to bring their own AI tools to work, like ChatGPT or Claude. These are often operated outside of the visibility and control of IT, creating blind spots and increases that risk of data exposure. Well, then you've got all the vulnerabilities and threats. So as organizations build and test their own AI apps, 66% are already doing so. New vulnerabilities are emerging. Attacks like indirect prompt injections are becoming more common, and 77% of organizations are concerned that these threats are concerned about these threats. And alarmingly, 11% are extremely worried that which is indicating the growth of urgency in addressing these risks. And then obviously there's the regulatory pressure. The landscape is ever evolving. Frameworks like EU AI and the NIST AI RMF are shaping how AI must be governed. Yet 55% of leaders admit that they don't actually understand how their AI is working or it's how to be regulated. And they're actively seeking guidance, so waiting for somebody else to tell you how it needs to be done for them taking impact and making change themselves. It's clear that there is certain uncertainty within the industry, whether it's around protecting the data, gaining visibility of the data, or defending against the new threats, or just navigating the compliance. But let's take a moment just to focus on this statistic alone. A recent Microsoft study found that 95% of security and risk leaders agree that their organizations need to have security measures put in place for AI systems, whether those would be the third-party SaaS solutions or software as a service, the enterprise-ready platforms, or custom-built applications within the next 12 to 24 months. This tells us two things. First, AI is no longer a future consideration. It is already embedded in how we operate, innovate, and compete. Secondly, while adoption is accelerating, the visibility and control over how AI interacts with sensitive data, internal systems, and user behavior is still lagging behind. And that gap introduces risk, not just from external threats, but from insider risk as well. Think of it as a well-intended employee using generative AI to summarize sensitive documentation, or a disgruntled insider feeding proprietary data into a public AI model. These aren't hypothetical situations. These are happening right now, quite possibly even today. This is where Microsoft Purview comes in. It provides that visibility, governance, and risk mitigation to be able to then secure your AI usage across your organization. Purview helps you understand where your data sits, how it's being accessed, and by who, whether it's a human or an AI system. So I'd like to just pass it over to Jeff as someone who would most likely be able to explain Purview in a bit more detail than I would. So I'll hand it over to Jeff.
Thanks, Anthony. I think it's really interesting the point you raised, and you're talking about AI is happening right now. I don't know if anyone's looking at the chat for this call that we are in right now, but and I don't know Hamish Kinsella, but Hamish has decided to fire up a little note-taking app from Otter AI. And so in the chat here, there's a little welcome message from this little chatbot saying, "Hi, I'm an AI assistant Taking notes. So this is a public webinar. We're not talking about proprietary information here. We're having a conversation with people. But this could be an example. In fact, we're looking at example in this call right now where if this was an internal meeting and we're talking about some super secret stuff that we're not quite ready to tell the rest of the world yet you've got this bot from the lovely people at Otter AI. I don't know them at all. Perhaps they're fabulous, perhaps they're not. But they're probably taking screenshots of this call. I'm guessing it's probably listening in on a transcript. It'll use that to go and generate some notes and summaries and action items and so on. But if this call was not a public webinar, but it was an internal meeting, then you've got the content of that meeting, including all of the screenshots and the transcript and everything else that's being shared, going off to some third-party platform somewhere which is going to use it for, valid or potentially nefarious purposes. So that's an example of the sort of stuff that's happening right now, perhaps with no malicious intention whatsoever. Again, I don't know, Hamish, maybe they're busy. Maybe they can't attend the call. They'd be interested and they want to get an idea of what we're covering. So this is not all about state-sponsored actors stealing information and so on. But this kind of stuff is happening all the time. And it's important that people like you start to think about and start to understand where some of these potential risks might lie and what you might do to solve them. So when we look at some of the capabilities that Microsoft have within our Purview stack, as you can see on screen here, we kind of separate them into these three kind of logical areas. Much of the focus in these sorts of conversations are generally around finding the kind of information that you choose to secure. And that's really in that data security, the blue column that you see on the right-hand side of your screen there. So what we're doing with the data security capabilities, whether it's in data loss prevention or insider risk management, that's typically where we're looking to identify the kind of material that we choose to select and protect. When we look in that middle column around data governance, these are some of the capabilities where we're looking to build a data catalogue or discovery to actually find where our sensitive information might be. And typically these data governance capabilities, they often go outside of the Teams messages, the emails, the documents, the kind of stuff you might store in a platform like Microsoft OneDrive or SharePoint or within your email and so on. And the data governance capabilities, they're often used more in the public cloud platforms, whether you've got databases in Amazon or perhaps in Google Cloud or with Azure. And it's around actually understanding what your data estate looks like, where your data is located, and to be able to understand what you're dealing with so that you can get the right sort of management and governance processes around it. And that data compliance column that you see in the green column on the end there, that's really around how we are using some of this information. So communication compliance is a capability that a lot of customers get a lot of great usage out. In terms of looking at the sentiment in Teams messages, is Jeff bullying Anthony? Am I talking over the top of him in meetings, or am I cutting him off or disregarding what he's saying? When we start to move into areas like harassment and so on, those are the sorts of insights that you can actually surface from these. But there's a lot of other stuff too. So whether it's records management, whether it's capabilities like e-discovery, if I'm looking for what are the communication between two of my staff on a particular topic over a certain period of time, and even the audit capability. As Marco said at the start, I'm a security solutions engineer for Microsoft, so I've been doing this kind of stuff. I got my first job in cyber in about 1997, so I've been doing this for a little while. Audit is a really important mechanism within our stack because it's the logging of all of the activity that happens within a Microsoft 365 world. So all the way down to emails that are being sent and received, to how often people are opening files, if they're copying them to various locations, and a hugely rich source of data which can be used. But rather than talk too much about the specific capabilities within the stack, what we might do is we might start off with a bit of a case study to give you a little bit of context. So let's go on to the next slide, if you would, Anthony. I'm going to introduce you to the mythical organisation Contoso Health. So mythical because we don't want to point any fingers and talk about specific examples that we are all increasingly hearing about, whether we're directly affected by breaches. If you're a frequent flyer of one of our major airlines, that's probably one of the recent ones that's front of mind, but there's been a number of them over the years, and these things have moved outside of being behind closed doors and being private information, certainly out into the public domain. But we're going to talk a little bit around this Contoso Health and the kind of examples that can happen when organisations go through some of these unfortunate kind of activities. So this is where, let's think about this as a bit of a Netflix drama, to think about the things you didn't know about. So every drama has a cast. So let's look at some of our heroes in this particular case. So we're going to start with Claire Bennett. So she's the Chief Information Security Officer, or the CISO. So she's the owner of the information security strategy. We'll call her Gandalf in our mythical story. So let's move on to Alex Nguyen, the SOC analyst. He's the unsung hero of the cyber world. So he's the person quietly keeping threats at bay, dealing with incidents and alerts, and making sure that we contain anything that happens before it gets too drastic. Then we have Eliana. So she's our data analyst. So she's the one who's driving AI innovation, so working with sensitive files, helping Contoso Health actually extract really important insights from the mountains of data that they have. And then we're going to go to Arjun, who's our superintendent nurse, our frontline worker, the person actually working with day-to-day all of the different critical systems within the hospital environment. All right, so let's begin our story now that we've met all of our characters. Next slide for me, please, Anto. Everyone deserves a holiday, including Claire. So this is where our story begins. So like all good people, when we go off on holiday, it's time to turn the phone off, turn off all the notifications, disconnect, take a bit of a break from work. And this is something that we all probably need to embrace more often that we do. But, just as she's settling in, nice view over the ocean, sailboats on the water, she gets a message from a persistent colleague. Have you seen this? And just like that, tranquility is shattered. Let's go next slide. On her phone, the headline pops up. Contoso Health reports data breach. If you've ever wondered what keeps people in senior positions awake at night, what are they worried about? This is the prime example. So suddenly the old relaxing vacation is going to be turning into a crisis management session, and Claire needs to get back as soon as possible. All right, let's go next slide. So let's think about what's happening in terms of the fallout. So if you've ever been in the unfortunate situation of having to deal with a breach, typically in the early stages, it's absolute chaos. So the kind of activities that happen within an organisation when they first start to go through one of these really terrible experiences, there'll be things like changes to access limits. We'll have things like everyone needs to reset their password. Typically, there is perhaps overreaction is the wrong word, but in order to if this is a health organisation, if we have to stem the bleeding and stabilise the patient, there's a lot of really disruptive things that happen at the very beginning of a breach and an activity. For the people that are involved, again, on the internal side around actually trying to stabilise the patient, some of the forensic teams, they are fascinated with trying to make sure that they keep hold of every single log. They need the evidence. And one of the really difficult decisions that needs to be made when you're in the midst of a breach is there's a tension between restoring our service. Whatever we don't have access to, we need to get systems back online. If our staff can't have gone through password resets and don't have access, we need to restore operations. We need to restore our frontline services, where we need to store customer and patient services in this particular case. But in our desperate rush to fix things, to get everything back up and running again, we need to be cognizant that all of the evidence that we need, you can't go and destroy that. So if we're rebuilding systems, if we are reinstalling applications, if we are actually removing the evidence that we would need to understand what happened, why, to whom, what's the breadth and scope of this, there is this unnatural tension between understanding our current situation and fixing the problem. Now, externally, largely in the early stages of a breach, is actually the communication aspects are super important, right? So it's all about media statements. How do we, in this case, they're a health organisation, how do they deal with their patients? Bracing for things like scam calls. And the media, the reputation components. We've all seen over some of the higher profile breaches over the last couple of years, very senior leaders are being, they front the media, they'll have some difficult questions to answer, they'll often have either missing or incorrect or incomplete information upon which they're trying to answer those questions. And the long-term impact, the real effect, is really, really difficult to quantify. All right, let's go for the next slide for me, please. So, fresh off the vacation, let's understand what the root cause might be. So, whether it's been a couple of days, maybe even a week since a breach, security teams have been digging through logs, collecting evidence, chasing down possibilities, and root cause is obviously the focus that everyone has here. The catch, the problem, if you're right, is there are often no right or wrong answers. Whether this is a sophisticated cyber attack or perhaps something far, far simpler, like there's been a known vulnerability or problem in a system that just for whatever reason wasn't fixed in a timely manner. It's not always about nation-state actors using really, really sophisticated techniques. The sad reality is that many breaches come about just from poor hygiene and poor management practices. So, there's lots of different scenarios you can come across, but realistically, once we get to the stage that we've done some analysis, that's where Alex, our SOC analyst, will generally have some findings to share. What they've discovered. Generally, it's rare that in these cases a single incident is caused it, but there's generally a couple of different threads. Often there might be something that's the major or primary cause, but there's often a number of secondary incidents that might have already taken place. Let's go for the next slide, Anthony. So, the primary incident, what happened? We go back to Arjun, our nurse, who was using an unsecured hotel business centre printer. No malicious intent here, no state-sponsored actor trying to steal information, just somebody trying to do their job, to get some work done while they're travelling. But the reality is there were no controls in place to stop that staff member from using the printer in the business centre in the hotel to go and print off a whole bunch of confidential, sensitive, maybe even patient information, and to use that kiosk system in there to go and log in, retrieve some data and print it with them. Because there's no controls in place, maybe the system they're using, the credentials might have been left in the open. Maybe even Arjun's left some of those printouts on the printer. So the opportunity for someone to be able to access that internal information, bulk patient data being able to be collected, and maybe even just, again, no sophisticated attack here. Maybe it was simply forwarded through things like email. It's a sad fact that in cybersecurity, we often get undone by good people with really good intentions, simply meeting bad security hygiene and a lack of controls. So let's go on to the next slide, Anthony. Typically what we find in the midst of an investigation like this, when people start digging deeply, they often find more than what they were originally anticipating. So as is often the case, this investigation's actually uncovered a secondary finding. So the data analyst that we were talking about before has been quietly uploading sensitive data to external generative AI websites. It's not unusual, especially in Australia. Anthony talked about the shadow AI problem of people bringing AI platforms to work. For many of us, we might not be emotionally ready to let our employers and managers know that we're actually using generative AI to help us keep on top of our work. In Australia, there's a cultural aspect to we might be choosing actively to use non-official, non-sanctioned, work authorised applications because I don't really want my boss to know that I'm using this AI assistant to help me keep on top of things. And that's just a sad fact of where we live and how many of our people think. There's no malicious intent involved, but they'd prefer not to admit that we're actually using some of these newer AI technologies just to keep across our workload. And so it's not always a malicious activity. The other cultural aspect, especially in Australia, for people that are dealing with sensitive information, if I've worked on a project for a couple of years and I've done some really, really good work, it's pretty common in Australia that we feel a really deep sense of ownership. So my employment agreement with my benevolent employer will have some kind of clause in there saying that the information, intellectual property that I create during my employment is the property of my employer. But I feel really connected to that. And it's very, very common for someone who's done a particular role for a particular company for a couple of years to go and find the next role for the next company and often take that work that they've done with them because they feel like it's theirs. By letter and clause in the employment agreement, it's not theirs at all. It belongs to their employer. They were paid to produce it. But it's very, very common for us to not feel any kind of regret over taking our work with us that we've worked so hard on, we're proud of, to take that with us to our next role. So in this case, we see that Eliana is actually, not only just uploading content to these generative AI sites, but actually collecting a whole bunch of these assets, because the reality is that, being a data scientist and a data analyst is a pretty in-demand job. The next opportunity is often around the corner, often with quite a hefty pay rise. So why wouldn't I take some of that work that I'm so proud of with me to the next job? Maybe she's transferred it to a USB drive. Maybe she's uploaded it to OneDrive or Dropbox or something along those sides. Maybe even taken the source code for some of the projects that she was working on. All right, let's go next slide. So let's have a look at Alex. So in terms of the post-mortem, what is often the case is that the reality that we find is that when these breaches occur, when we look back in hindsight, there were probably a lot of things that we could have done, which for whatever reason we didn't. So when Alex starts to do his post-incident review or analysis, we might find that they had technologies like Microsoft Purview in place, but they weren't really being utilised to their fullest. We have a lot of customers that deploy technology. They often do it in a bit of a rush. The stage one project where we'll just get things up and running and then we'll look to improve things later on. Sometimes the reality is that later never comes. So we might find that technologies like information protection, which is what we use to identify and label data. Maybe it's confidential or sensitive. Maybe it's public and general and should be shared. Perhaps the labeling was in place, but it was manual. It relied on someone to actively go in and mark that spreadsheet or mark that Word document and classify it manually. We weren't utilising the automatic capabilities that are available as part of the platform. Maybe when we label our documents as being confidential or sensitive, would actually like an action to be taken, like let's encrypt that document to secure access to make sure that only the people that have the appropriate permissions and rights to see it can actually go and read it. If we look about some of the hygiene elements we have around a capability called insider risk management, which is a detective control which we use to analyse the way that people interact with information. Jeff doesn't normally go and download the entire contents of his OneDrive. He doesn't normally go and visit every single SharePoint site he can access and download all of that stuff. So when my behaviour changes, the risk profile of my behaviour might take me from a low risk to a medium risk or a high risk. And one of the great capabilities around insider risk management is the ability to be able to take a mechanism we call adaptive protection, which is really around taking those really aggressive or punitive DLP policies, like I'm going to stop you from printing or stop you from copying information to a thumb drive. Rather than punishing the people doing the right thing, users who might be at a low risk, why don't I only apply those punitive or restrictive policies to the high-risk users, the ones where their behaviour means that they can no longer be trusted to do some of these more sensitive actions. And that's some of the really important things to look at. Let's go to the next slide. So let's look at how we respond. Because, sometimes we can't help what happens to us, but we can absolutely manage our response to those bad things that may happen. So let's look at Claire's mandate. So often we see in these breach activities, there's often an initial series of events, so that prevent column that you can see, and then what are we going to do once the patient is stabilised, once we've stopped the bleeding, and how do we actually learn from the perhaps the mistakes of the past, and what are we actually going to do about it? So things like those initial actions, the DLP enforcement. Well, maybe we move beyond some of the warning, the logging, the auditing that is often in case in many of these platforms. Let's actually advance those controls into more into greater levels of efficacy. So let's start encrypting those documents that are labelled as confidential. Let's start blocking the use of some of those non-managed third-party mechanisms that are in place. We may well have the endpoint DLP agent deployed to all of our laptops and computers everywhere, but let's move beyond the information collection and the monitoring side to actually start taking some action when people's behaviours go beyond what we're comfortable with. Things like our insider risk policies, they can be used to drive a whole bunch of activities. That adaptive protection, applying the punitive DLP controls, is one example, but I can actually use insider risk to talk about, because Jeff's behaviour has changed and I'm now a high risk user, maybe I start blocking access to some of our more sensitive applications. I can use things like conditional access to use risk-based conditional access and say, I'm going to make a different choice around the applications you can access and where you can access them from based on the risk profile that we've assigned to you. And that risk profile has come from your behaviours and what you've been doing. So those are some of the things that Claire's putting in place immediately in those first 30 days. But realistically, it's about how do we learn from these events and what are we going to change? How are we going to mitigate those risks and help us control some of these things? So let's go back and revisit some of those stage one activities of those projects and really start to advance our information security program. So let's look at labelling. Let's finalise the taxonomy or the structure and what we're going to be doing around how we're going to be actually attaching a DLP policy to a label that I've put in place. Because we see a lot of customers, they'll come up with a labelling mechanism. This is general, this is public, this is sensitive, this is confidential. But let's go beyond labelling. Let's actually start to apply actions and policies to those labels. So what are we going to do with those confidential files? We're going to say, actually, you can't print them, you can't forward them, you can't save them to USB. These are the SharePoint locations you can store them in, and so on. The rule promotion aspects. Let's move beyond the auditing, monitoring, simulation, and let's actually move into enforcement. And lastly, that tuning and metrics problem. Often when we deploy these capabilities at first, we put a lot of effort into making sure that they work, they're secure by default and they start to operate. But the reality is every customer needs to tune those policies to match the way you work. You need to define these are the activities and the ways of working that we are very, very happy with in a standard business practice. And these are the things that we're not happy with. So working through the telemetry that you collect to tune out those false positives, to look at the overrides that are being put in place and actually mature your policies so that they're operational is super important. And once you've gone through that kind of phase, that's when you have a data security toolset which is focused. It's actually protecting your most critical data, and it helps you understand exactly what's happening in your environment. Let's go for the last one. So after we've gone through this kind of process, this is kind of the journey that Contoso Health have gone through. So something bad happened. They responded, they stabilised that patient, they stopped the bleeding. But most importantly, they were able to look at what are the immediate things that we can do to reduce our risk. And then over a longer period of time, over that 3, 4, 5 month cycle, that's when we start to look at how we can advance our cybersecurity program, how we can apply those policies more effectively. How do we work with the business to make sure that we're putting the right levels of controls in place to ensure that we're actually providing a far more structured and secure kind of environment. And that's really the key here. So we can't always control the bad things that happen to us, whether it was by mistake or on purpose, but we can always influence our response. We can always learn from the actions that happen and how we can improve our response around it. And that's probably the most important kind of thing to take from a case study like this is when the bad thing happens, because unfortunately it is far more likely to be when rather than if. But when it happens, how are we going to identify it? How are we going to respond? And ultimately, how are we going to recover? That's got to be the process and approach that you take. All right, let's go one more slide for me, please, Anthony. So we talked a little bit about the mythical Contoso help. I've mentioned a few of the different capabilities that are in place, but we have this kind of 4-stage deployment approach that we think is important. So if we think about that first foundational column, let's start with things like labelling. Let's start with things like putting in some SharePoint site or even OneDrive kind of capabilities. So let's just turn on some of the initial capabilities and actually make a start on this process. Let's turn on things like our insider risk management capability. That's a passive control. It's a monitoring mechanism. I think it's about 7 clicks to get you started. Once you turn on insider risk, it has a learning period where it needs to understand. This is all about behaviors, right? So it needs to understand what user behaviors are like. But after about 2 weeks, you can start to really look at the telemetry that insider risk is providing you to start to make some data-driven decisions around the behaviors that it's identifying, and you can start to make choices around the behaviors that you approve of and the behaviors that you want to change. When we move into that second stage around managed, that's where we want to kind of expand the protection and really start to think about where are the automation opportunities that start to come in. So let's think about default labeling against liabilities. Let's look at the auto labeling mechanisms that are in place. We might not do it everywhere, but if we can identify things like credentials and passwords that might be in a Word document used by IT people as part of the documentation, that's a really good place to start. Let's look at turning on DLP for content that isn't labelled. Let's look at some of those adaptive protection capabilities. Let's start applying some of those policies to the users whose behaviour deserves a bit more control. And that's where we start to move away from just kind of the initial configuration and enablement of some of these areas to let's start looking at some of the priority content. We don't have to do this everywhere, but let's pick the important information sources. When we move into that third column around optimizing, well, that's when we start to get really interested around things. So this is where we start to do things like automatically label sensitive files on the clients to start. Actually, let's broaden some of the automatic labeling capabilities for files at rest, wherever they're being saved. So maybe that's in SharePoint, maybe that's in OneDrive, wherever it happens to be sitting in there. Let's start really looking into the alerts that we're getting and start tuning and getting rid of those false positives. Because the reality is when we first turn these platforms on, they generate a lot of signal, a lot of alert activity. Not all of that will be useful for you and your environment. So tuning those policies down so that you start to really rely on the alerts and the incidents and so on that are being raised is important. And then let's start to look at actually applying some of these things to historical data. And so we're moving beyond just the new stuff, just the crown jewels, our starting points. Let's start to broaden the approach around it. And then finally, when we get to that strategic mechanism, let's look at things like, let's actually start to review some of the user labeling behaviours. Let's look at, did we make the right decisions around our labelling and taxonomy and structure kind of areas? Are there, in hindsight, after we've been using this for a period of time, are there lessons learned on how we can improve things? That third point there around setting up the accountability chain, this is super important. I guarantee you, if these projects are driven by IT people without the involvement of the business, your data security program is probably going to fail. It is super important to have the involvement of everybody within the environment, not just the technical people that understand the policies and the controls and I can do this and wouldn't it be cool if we did that, but let's understand how the business actually use data, because these technologies are really there to help our users make better decisions. Rather than our nurse deciding to log into the business centre in the hotel and log into webmail and print off a few documents and maybe leave a couple of them on the printer and then rush off to the airport, maybe we can help people make better choices around how they use and interact and manipulate some of the data that's there. And then in that strategic column, let's look beyond the typical Microsoft 365 email, SharePoint, Teams, OneDrive stuff. Let's start to look into some of the data that we store in our applications and our systems. Maybe they're with Amazon, maybe they're with Google, maybe they're inside databases. Let's move beyond some of that unstructured data, the files and the spreadsheets and the Teams messages, into some of our larger and more important data sets. And actually, as that blue bar says down the bottom there, move the protection beyond the productivity M365 areas to some of the systems and the core business systems that might be hosting some of this information. All right, Anthony, I think it's time for you to delve deeper into some of the specifics. I've talked about some stuff at a really high level, but I'm going to invite Anthony to give you a couple of specific and pragmatic examples of how these capabilities work, what they look like, and how you can use them.
Appreciate it, Jeff. Yeah, look, thanks for that. It's obviously the case study, very hypothetical, but very, close to, I guess, what could potentially be happening in your environment. Obviously, we touched very heavily on that insider risk, the adaptive controls. We touched on data loss prevention. What can you do? What can you prevent? But not only just what you can prevent, but how you can also teach what can be, considered safe practices within your organization. And then I'll try and round it off with regards to, I guess, how that all kind of looks within that new AI space. But look, focusing really back on insider risk, we're in today's hybrid work environment, I guess, the people are working all over the place, from home, from office, from coffee shops, from hotels, and sharing information across many platforms. That flexibility is extremely great for productivity, get more done, probably when you should be turned off from it all. But that also means that the sensitive data itself can be exposed, leaked, or even just stolen. What's surprising is that 1 in 5 data breaches come from inside an organization by accident, or sometimes on purpose, as insider risk as it is. But these can nearly take 3 months or so to detect or contain, costing the business upwards of millions. And that's obviously where the Microsoft Purview insider risk management comes from. I guess just talking about the benefits, very briefly and high, starting with privacy, we know that monitoring employees can raise concerns. In fact, over half of the organizations that were put out in terms of surveys worry that hurting employees' trust can cross, or at least prevent, privacy lines. Microsoft themselves take this extremely seriously by ensuring that Purview and its security controls has privacy at its core. So hiding identities during investigations or limiting who can see that access or that sensitive information is all kept within that audit logging. So it really is balancing that safety and respect for the people. Then also it's the simplicity or the smarter detection. So instead of using multiple tools and manually piecing together all the pieces of the puzzle, Purview uses smart detection for that. So the idea is it can map essentially a set of different tasks. So example would be, renaming confidential files or potentially saving them to a USB, or then just, saving them to USB and then deleting. That might be signs of data theft. Purview has the ability to map all of those patterns automatically without the need of extra software or employee devices to be, monitored. And then obviously the faster action. So once the risk is detected, Purview with the help of DLP can obviously be applied, similar to what Jeff was mentioning in regards to that adaptive risk. So if someone's risk level goes up, Purview can automatically apply a stronger protection, like blocking certain actions, blocking certain applications to prevent further damage whilst the investigation continues. So rather than just saying what it is, I do want to jump into a bit more of how that looks for those that are curious, because I think that's where it starts to really unfold. So there's a built-in feature called analytics that allows you to scan your environment to see everything. So as Jeff mentioned, you don't need to configure anything up front. There's no software, there's no agents to be installed. The idea is that with the right permissions, you would just run a scan. I believe it is 48 hours, but the idea is that it gets you a clear picture as to what's happening. So the insights are based on anonymous, aggregated data, so user privacy is protected. You'll see things as to how many users shared sensitive files externally. So if there's a specific protection layer, obviously that would be visible, or who's about to leave the organization if you tie in your HR system. So based on what you can find, Purview then allows you to quick start policies to tailor to your organization. So based on what it can see, it'll then also suggest what you could do to be able to prevent bad things from occurring. These are easy to set up, just a few general clicks. But then it essentially allows you to start protecting your data straight away. It really is that simple. It's fairly low effort to understand your risk landscape and then to take action before problems arise. Once your organization enables these policies, the system then starts to surface alerts when these detected issues or potential risks are occurring. So one of the powerful things that occurs is that rich insight. So thanks to, built-in machine learning and whatnot, it allows you to help focus on, I guess, what matters most. So I'll use two examples. So obviously, some users have access to more sensitive data or hold positions that could cause greater damage if misused. So, someone with administrative privileges may be able to damage more than what someone with standard privileges. So Purview itself can automatically flag these individuals as potential high impact users based on, how much sensitive data they can see or even interact with, what's their role in the organizational structure, how many people report to them, for example, or whether they just have elevated permissions, the ability to become an administrator through the function of PIM. This helps security teams prioritize alerts so that you can have a better look into the impact on the organization based on these. But not all data leaks happen in one big event. It's quite often not Jeff's go to every SharePoint site, download everything, copy it to a USB, delete everything, so on and so forth. Sometimes it can be a slow move. The idea of printing a file or emailing one the next day, it's harder to catch. So obviously, Purview looks at these and detects a cumulative exfiltration pattern. So that's things that are occurring over time. So instead of manually alerting, Purview assists you with focusing on what matters most quickly, intelligently, and with privacy in mind. How that looks, obviously using the user activity chart. Each activity is a colored bubble, very easy to look at. Each color represents a different type of risk, like data exfiltration, or just security concerns, or any attempts to hide an action. This helps investigation quickly understand what's happening, whether it's a series of events or it's part of a larger, long drawn out case, I guess you could say. And then obviously, if you have your ability to link in your HR system, you can see key events such as, when did they resign, within that as well, to be able to provide you more context. And then just digging a little bit in the user intent itself. So being able to call out things like sequence detection, where certain events such as, over a few weeks, the user downloaded files from an unapproved source, renamed those files to make them look less sensitive, printed them and then deleted them. The idea is that if they look to cover their tracks, Purview will call that out. Realizing that we're running lower on that time, I just want to focus on Content Explorer. So of those files, for example, in an investigation, the idea is that you can look at what those files are or what's in them. So you don't have to go hunting through the folders or files or even those systems to be able to figure that out. So for example's sake, if it's an Excel file, you can even look at what formulas are in each of those cells. So that in itself provides a huge amount of time back for those security teams doing those investigations, but also understanding the impact or potential impact of an incident. So that, I guess, is your visibility over the top of things, but really focusing on that prevention side of things, that's where data loss prevention comes in, or DLP. So data loss prevention, once again, highlighting some of it, 85% of organizations say that they're not confident in detection and prevention of data loss prevention. And with so many applications, services, it's not it's easy to see why. Purview DLP is cloud native, so it's built right in your M365 and Windows. No extra software is needed. It's fast setup, less maintenance overall. Unified, once again, it's all of your DLP policies in one place. So over 40 certain controls, you'll be able to fine tune what happens without getting it in the way of your daily work. Obviously, it has its integration components. So that's such as DLP works hand in hand with other Purview tools like information protection, insider risk management. It also connects into Defender, so it gives you better response for a security team. And as mentioned, it is easy to start. So you can start to put some of these policies together quite easily, even if you have other DLP systems like Semantic. Microsoft even provide a migration path and a tool to help do that. Mentioning that it is cloud native, the idea of this is that you can integrate it in with your existing systems. So that's systems such as Mac or Google Chrome or Firefox from a browser's perspective, or even non-Microsoft apps like Dropbox, Box, Google Drive, all of that being able to integrate from a DLP perspective to be able to then see your data, where it sits, who has access, all sits within that. Purview obviously then also has the ability to cover off your on-premises. So, not only just in that M365 and cloud space, but on your on-premises file shares as well. So giving it a well-rounded solution for where your data sits. Highlighting it, I guess the DLP itself, it works in isolation. So it doesn't work in isolation, sorry. It's a part of a broader integrated security ecosystem itself. So across the board, using things like your information protection to be able to classify your specific files and whatnot, or communication, being able to mark something as confidential or internal, Purview knows to apply specific data loss prevention to those types, so that it's not just tagging data, you're proactively being able to, prevent things from being mishandled based on its sensitivity. DLP also has the ability to integrate with inside a risk, as we mentioned. So if the user risk increases based on activity, such as they're leaving the company or they're just showing some unusual behavior, Purview has the ability to automatically apply. Highlighting what that DLP looks like. So obviously there's certain DLP functions that you can touch on, but these are not necessarily a restriction tool. They can also be a tool for learning. The idea of that is that, rather than just, having an iron fist and implying that, you're not going to be able to do your thing, this can be used as a learning tool to be able to advise, this actually contains sensitive information and we don't want it to leave these four walls, all the way through to just giving tips about handling sensitive data. Obviously, with any sort of impact comes the what does that look like? I just want to highlight what that looks like for Outlook. Everybody's been using it, unless you're not. And then the idea is that what does that look like? So everything from policy tips, such as an acknowledgement. So if somebody's about to send something that might be sensitive, they can get a gentle reminder, please be careful when sending this content. You can obviously then have a block with override. So the idea is that you would need to justify why you're sending this. So in a medium risk case, we'll call it, the user is asked to justify why they're sending this content. Maybe they have manager's approval already, or the recipient is entitled to receive it. So that just adds that additional, layer of protection to show accountability while still allowing to be flexible. But then there's obviously just your ability to block. So high risk scenarios, maybe it's sensitive IP or, patient health, for example, you can just block the email completely, say, this isn't allowed. This is protected by the organization from serious data breaches. The idea of these pop-ups is to prevent both accidental and intentional data leaks, but also enforces policy awareness right from the action. So in a greenfields environment, they're especially powerful in shaping secure habits from day one. And to get started, it really is quite simple. As mentioned, there's a bunch of built-in policies, so such as your common regulations, such as GDPR, HIPAA, or PCI DSS. These give you a solid starting point for your organization. As also mentioned, if you have a existing tool such as Semantic DLP, Microsoft also has a migration tool. So the idea is that you put in the information, it exports XML, it analyzes them, maps the components backwards and forwards, and then helps you put together the migration plan for what that looks like within your environment. So rather than, we've looked at insider risk and we've looked at stopping risk, but the idea now is that we're in the generation of AI, AI usage across the enterprise. And how do we potentially fix that or monitor that? Fairly sure that we are running low on time. So I guess what I want to end it off on is data security posture management, or DSPM, specifically for AI. So Microsoft gets or DSPM for AI. The idea of it is that Microsoft has a strategic key pillars for their approach to protecting AI. So from data security, which is foundational, making sure that sensitive data is protected when AI interacts with it, all the way through to the posture management. So that is obviously data security, posture management. That's the visibility into how things are being used. Threat protection, such as risky leak of data, prompt injection, misuse. The safety systems, that's things like abuse or risky user behavior. And then the governance side of things. So that's, meeting certain standards and regulatory compliances to ensure that things like audit trails and retention policies and accountability is in place. So this obviously stems across all the types of AI. That's Microsoft's commitment to this, is that, it's all of Microsoft Copilot and agents, enterprise AI such as ChatGPT, or ChatGPT Enterprise, consumer AI, so that could be potentially your not paid ChatGPT in this case, or just a custom built AI such as your internal models that you might be developing. The idea is that DSPM for AI looks to not only just secure one tool, but secure all AI tools. Highlighting, I guess, what this is the Purview, dashboard. The idea is that you go to DSPM for AI, and it gives you 4 foundational steps. The idea of this is that you would activate Microsoft Purview Audit. This gives you the visibility. Then you'd install a browser. This gives you that external app AI. So they might be using something on the web that you're not aware of. That gives you that shadow AI usage. Then obviously you'd come through to onboarding your device, ensuring that endpoints are protected from unauthorized applications, but then obviously extending the insight through data discovery. So once you've done all of that, it naturally progresses you through to the recommendations, which is where it shifts from, just as general setup to strategic. Obviously, there is quite a few recommendations which can come from your environment. The idea is that it looks at your environment and the context of your environment to be able to focus on what you would need. For example, if you're in a greenfields. The idea of this is it focuses on key areas such as information protection, data loss prevention, and communication compliance. Across the board, that would be the, what it looks to, protect against. Looking at reporting, you would have certain things that you could look at. So you can filter by Copilot experience and agents, such as, Copilot or Copilot security. You can look at the enterprise, such as Azure AI or ChatGPT Enterprise. You can also then look at the interactions that are being used, AI app usage within your environment, or what apps you might not be aware of are present. So that in itself kind of allows you to check shadow AI adoption or policy violation if you do, only allow for a certain set. Just re-highlighting in that apps and agents, there's a really, a lot of context that you can centralize and get from all of your AI agents. This gives you a broad overview of user activity, prompts and responses, and potentially the policy coverage to ensure that the policies that you have in place do actually meet the requirement for those agents or those applications, and then allow you to then click on and discover a bit deeper into it all. So the idea of that is it looks towards shifting a gear up, from data leakage all the way through to the use of shadow AI using this tool. Once again, starting with discover, first you need to know what you're using, what's the tool you're trying to, what tools are you trying to use to discover? So in some cases, Defender for Cloud Apps would be one. Then you'd look to block. So once again, identify what apps you don't want, block them straight away. Then you'd obviously want to pivot to securing that data. The idea of that is to control what data is shared. So, public is fine, confidential is not, all the way through to govern. So ensuring that people are using these tools effectively with certain ethical principles in mind, but essentially an end-to-end of discovering the usage of AI, blocking the unsanctioned applications or not allowed, securing data in sanctioned tools, and then governing that AI interaction and accountability. So once again, just wrapping it up, starting through from discovery, visibility is the first step. So using Purview to then find what is happening within your environment, protecting using functions such as DLP to be able to monitor and protect your sensitive data whilst in the use of these AI systems, and then obviously govern. Compliance isn't optional. Purview enables you to be able to govern controls that align rather than just, hoping for the best. That in itself kind of wraps it back up. I will hand it over to Mario. I realize that we've cut it very fine with time, but I do appreciate everybody who attended, and I thank you all for your time today.
So, yeah, Look, thanks everyone for joining. We might, as we say, we're basically on time. If anyone's got any questions, happy to take some of those on. I think the two main questions that I had is where's the interest coming from in your organisation? Is it the C-suite, production, admin, finance, sales, and marketing? And what are the benefits that are being sought and the concerns? They're probably the first two questions. So happy to take any of those if people still want to hang on, or take some of those questions after this event. Okay. If we don't have any questions, we're happy to take those later on. I just did want to just do a quick wrap up and just give a little bit of context of who Canon Business Services is. We're about 1,800 people within region with a fairly deep expertise and broad capability around our solutions, which includes design, build, and deploy across infrastructure, applications, data and AI, and security. Our BPO business, which is around business or focus on process optimization, workflow automation, and digitizing process from manual and paper. And then lastly, our managed services business, which sits across service desk, infrastructure, and security. We talked a little bit about our relationship with Microsoft. We do sit in terms of accreditations with Microsoft within the top 1%. So Microsoft have their designations, as you can see on screen. We've got all the certs across that. So we work pretty closely with Microsoft across all of those designations. And I think probably last thing would be I guess an open offer to everyone that we do offer free assessments right across our entire stack of infrastructure, apps, data and AI, and security, and would love to offer or extend out that offer to any of our customers who may want to understand where are you in the readiness and adoption of AI, as well as the security maturity, the gaps, and the remediation of those. So I don't want to labour too long. We're 3 minutes over, but please feel free to reach out to us through either directly through our account managers or one of the people on this call. And the last thing I'd like to do is thank Jeff and Anthony and everyone on this call. So we might wrap up there, and thank you again. Enjoy your day.